I am Vanessa Scherer, the director of the Columbia Professor Alliance Program, and on behalf of the Alliance Program and the School of International and Public Affairs, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all at Columbia for a unique discussion on the non-proliferation issue and Iran. Obviously, our discussion tonight is extremely timely, as the reduction of nuclear weapon production has mobilized international relations affairs in the past month, as the debate hovers over Iran, as today is celebrated the anniversary of the Iranian Revolution. And while France is currently presiding to the Security Council of the United Nations, we are extremely fortunate to have with us tonight the French ambassador to the United Nations, Monsieur Gérard Araud, who kindly accepted our invitation tonight to engage in a debate with the students and the faculty of Columbia University. Obviously, our topic tonight is widely taught across schools and across departments at Columbia University and of great interest to many of our students and our faculty. And I'd like to take some time to thank a few of my colleagues at Columbia who promoted this event with us. In particular, I'd like to thank the United Nations Studies Program at SIPA and Miss Elizabeth Lindermeyer, the Middle East Institute at Columbia University, the CDTR, the Center for the Study of Democracy, Toleration and Religion, the IRCPL, the Institute for Religion, Culture and Public Life, and the Department of French Studies at Columbia University. And now, on behalf of all of them and the Columbia community, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome to Columbia Ambassador Gérard Araud, who is the permanent representative of France to the United Nations in New York. A former ambassador of France to Israel from 2003 to 2006, Gérard Araud is also a former Deputy Secretary General for the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Foreign and European Affairs, and a former Director General for Political Affairs and Security. And in that capacity, Gérard Araud was the principal negotiator of the 3 sanction resolutions that were taken by the UN Security Council on Iran on behalf of, between 2006 and 2008. So thank you very much, Ambassador Araud, for accepting our invitation tonight. Thank you in particular, I have to say, on behalf of 2 of your alma maters, that is to say the École Polytechnique et Sciences Po, who are, as you know, 2 pillars of the Alliance Program. We are also very fortunate to have with us tonight Professor Richard Bulliet, who will be our moderator tonight. Richard Bulliet is a professor of history at Columbia University and a highly respected member and former director of the Middle East Institute at Columbia. Professor Bulliet specializes in Middle East history and the social and institutional history of Islamic countries. He is the author, among many others, of The Camel and the Wheel and The Case for the Christian Islamic Civilization, published in 2006. So I will now open the floor to Ambassador Araud for his remarks. That will be followed by a discussion with Professor Bulliet, and then we will open the floor to the Q&As, which is a great, much valued tradition at Columbia University. For those of you who are not familiar to our gatherings, please be prepared to be requested to stand in line behind the mic to ask your questions. Thank you again for both of you for being with us tonight for a unique discussion. Your presence with us certainly embodies what we at the Alliance Program try to do semester after semester, both in Paris and in New York, that is to say, attempt to offer a platform for debate, a platform for transatlantic dialogue on the pressing issues on our times, always rooted in the academia. Thank you again.
Good evening. I nearly cancelled my this meeting because the issue is so sensitive that I'm a bit terrified about what I'm going to say. So I'm going first to tell you I'm not here to discuss the news. So I'm not going to answer any questions about the news. You know, really, I'm here. I'm not going to discuss about, you know, the most recent or the near future developments in the Iranian nuclear crisis. You know, this issue is too sensitive. It's negotiated by a few individuals, and it's not possible to discuss it in public in real time. It doesn't mean that I'm not going, that I'm going to say nothing. It really means, and neither I try not to be a typical diplomat, you know, really a typical diplomat could say nothing during 2 hours. So what I'm going to say maybe will be less exciting, especially for the journalists to be, but I hope that at least I try to help you to understand the crisis. So my approach will be analytical and based on the facts and on my own experience. You know, I've been the French negotiator since 2006 and 2009, and actually before I'd worked on these issues for 5 or 6 years. I let you draw your own opinion from this analysis. So the analysis will be mine, the opinion will be yours. So I make a few points to open the discussion, a few points, and to try to make understand a very long story. The first point is that it's a very long story. It started in 2002 when actually we were suddenly informed by several sources that there was a clandestine nuclear Iranian program, and that which was actually quite extensive. In 2003, the 3 European ministers of foreign affairs from France, from Germany, and the United Kingdom sent a letter to Iran, and after that they went to Tehran to try to say, we have to discuss it. We have to negotiate with you. So it had started in 2003 with the 3 Europeans, and later on 3 other countries have joined the group of negotiators, which means China, Russia, and the United States. So we have created what is called the E3 plus 3 group, the 3 Europeans plus 3 China, Russia, and the United States. So we have, the international community has been negotiating with Iran since 2003, so 6 years. So it's a very, very long story. So first, I think I want to emphasize a few points. First, I think the nature of the Iranian nuclear program is raising concerns in the international community at large. Let's be, you know, the International Agency of Atomic Energy has voted 2 resolutions on it. The UN Security Council has voted 5 resolutions. Among these 5 resolutions, 3 of them have imposed sanctions against Iran, and these 5 resolutions have been voted with no dissent. With no dissent. Libya has voted sanctions against Iran. South Africa has voted sanctions against Iran. You know, in other words, to be blunt, it's not Iraq revisited. You know, it's not the West, the North against Iran. It's the international community at large which is expressing its concerns. As you know, France, Germany, China, Russia have opposed the war against Iraq against Iraq in 2003. And now, not only they consider that really there is a problem, but actually they are in the driver's seat of, you know, they are members of this group of 6 countries which try to find a diplomatic outcome to the crisis. So that's the first point. You know, it's not the North, the West, it's really the international community which expresses its concerns about this program. The second point is nobody denies the right of Iran to nuclear civilian energy. Nobody. You know, that's not the problem. The right, which is enshrined in the Non-Proliferation Treaty, has been reaffirmed by all the declarations of the 6 ministers. It has been reaffirmed by all the resolutions of the UN Security Council. The demand of the international community is simple. What we are asking to the Iranians is the restoration of the international confidence in the civilian nature of the Iranian nuclear program. The restoration of the international confidence in the civilian nature of the Iranian nuclear program. The question is to define with Iran the measures which could be taken, which, while respecting the rights, of course, of Iran, would reassure the world. It's what we have tried for 6 years. We have tried to open a negotiation with Iran to define together these measures. Third point, as I've said, it's a very long story, 2003. And I can tell you that since 2003, we have tried everything to open a negotiation. We really want to reach a diplomatic solution to the crisis. So the three Europeans in the first time, and later on the E3+3, we have met the Iranians dozens of times, hundreds of hours to try to open the negotiation. We have made a lot of different proposals. Proposals on the procedure, proposal on the substance. We have presented to Iran in 2006 and 2008 two proposals encompassing a wide range of fields of cooperation, where we have not discussed only nuclear. We have really proposed to the Iranians a wide range of cooperations in fields going from agriculture to civilian aviation. Actually, we went, and I was a member of the group, we went to Tehran in June 2008 to present the second proposal. And lastly, and not the least, of course, the Obama administration has offered to open a dialogue without preconditions with Iran. On the bilateral basis, as you can guess, we, the 6 countries, we have maintained an intensive dialogue with the Iranians at all levels and on all issues. President Putin went to Tehran, I think it was in 2007 or 2008, October. The Chinese Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, they went to Tehran to no avail. And that's the problem that we are facing and that we are really still facing today. We have not succeeded, and let's be frank, we have not succeeded to open a negotiation. It's not a question of saying that our offer was not sufficient. It's simply that the negotiation has never started. In 6 years, that we have never had even the beginning of the negotiation on the substance of our proposal. They have been dismissed. They have not been discussed. We have never been told, oh, what you are proposing is not enough, because it would have been a beginning. No, simply we have not succeeded to open a negotiation. On the Iranian side, we have never had concrete proposals. We have heard public announcements, and still recently, but these public announcements have been either not followed by any concrete proposal or actually have been denied discreetly afterwards. So, again, we have not succeeded to enter into a negotiation on our terms or in their terms. And I really want to repeat because what should be obvious to all of us, our only goal is to open a negotiation and to reach an agreement. This crisis is too serious, and I'll come to it. I'll come to it. Point 5. Our approach since the beginning has been called the dual-track approach. On one track, you try to open a negotiation, and on the other track, if you don't succeed to open a negotiation, you put a pressure on the other side, and it is the sanctions. As I have said, 3 resolutions of sanctions have been voted by the Security Council from 2006 to 2008. The sanctions are not an end in themselves. Their goal is to convince Iran to enter into a genuine negotiation on measures, I repeat myself, to restore confidence in the civilian nature of their program. Nothing more, nothing else, nothing less. And when I said nothing more, of course, the message behind it is we are not in the regime change game. We are here, we are handling the nuclear issue. There is no hidden agenda, but the will to respond adequately to the concerns of the international community. 6.6. A failure, not a failure, to reach a diplomatic solution that we have been striving for will be extremely serious. Extremely serious. First, the future of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, and beyond of the non-proliferation system is at stake. Because the military nuclearization of Iran, or as a reality, or even as a potential threat, you know, really even as a potential threat, will lead other neighboring countries to consider that their security depends on their following the same path. You know, I think there are two main proliferation crises. When I was a student in the 70s, I was told in 2000 there will be 15 nuclear powers. 15, and that was the list. Argentina, Brazil, South Africa, and well, actually we have succeeded to keep largely the genius in the bottle. And today there are two nuclear crises, North Korea and Iran. North Korea, the crisis is managed by the neighbors. The six-party talks, you know, followed by Russia, China, South Korea, Japan. You know, these countries are trying to solve the problem through negotiation. But what is striking is that even if North Korea actually is a nuclear power, it doesn't mean that South Korea or Japan have declared the day afterwards, okay, since they have the bomb, we are going to have the bomb. So that's, in a sense, the crisis is still limited. In the Middle East, it's quite different. In the Middle East, nobody could say what will be the incentive for the neighbors, considering that they can consider that their security is at stake, that the region is very fragile and very, very unstable. And of course, beyond the region, once the genius is out of the bottle, other countries will feel obliged for security or status reasons to follow. It will be the end of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Second point, of course, and that's, I should say, very easy, the Middle East is a fragile region. The inflammatory declarations that we have heard in Tehran have, of course, raised genuine concerns, some even fears elsewhere. A military confrontation couldn't be excluded. Would the diplomatic effort fail? We do want to avoid this disaster. It's very easy to imagine what could be the consequences in this region of a military confrontation. So I'm going to conclude here. I've tried to give you, in a sense, the logic of our common effort. You know, we have been working together, the three Europeans, China, Russia, and the US, and I think it's a remarkable factor. Of course, there are nuances between the six countries. Of course, there are nuances. There are also nuances between the three Europeans. There are nuances between Europeans and the Americans, between and so on. You know, because we have different interests, different geography. It's totally normal. I think what is uniting us, and that's the fundamental, what is uniting us is the conviction that here we have a concern, and here we have to address it. And I guess that, I'm sure, actually, this concern, this common concern is still there, and the common will of the six countries is to work together. After all, on the substance of the sanctions, on the timing of the sanctions, since 2006, actually since 2003, we have had discussions, we have had disagreements, we have had hesitation, doubts, but I can testify, because I've negotiated 3 resolutions of sanctions, that at the end of the day, after long hours and nights and grueling process of reconciliation between the different conceptions, I think we have always the 6 countries, which means the P5, the 5 permanent members plus Germany. It's another way of presenting the 6. The P5 plus Germany, we have always reached an agreement, and an agreement because we all share the same concern. And as I've said, other countries around this group are really sharing the concern and want, like us, that we reach a diplomatic solution to a very serious crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. A very diplomatic presentation, as we would have expected. So I want to spend a few minutes pressing you perhaps a little in a little different fashion, and I'll try and make this brief enough that starting in about 15 minutes we will have a general question and answer session. In remarks that you made on January 28th, which I think was 3 days before you took up your chairmanship of the Security Council, you made some interesting points. One of them was that in order to think of deterrence as a model for the future of Iranian nuclear relations, one had to assume that the parties that are in potential conflict are reasonable parties. And you observed that the comments of Mr. Ahmadinejad did not fit that definition of reasonable. And yet, I recall vividly as a teenager, Nikita Khrushchev saying, "We will bury you," and Americans taking that as a literal threat of nuclear annihilation in the way that some people in Israel and some friends of Israel take President Ahmadinejad's comments about Israel as being literally promising or threatening a nuclear annihilation. 7 years later, Khrushchev backed down from that in 1963, but for years that phrase, "we will bury you," was brought up again and again and again to show the unreasonableness of the other side, and yet deterrence succeeded during that period. And then at another point in the same session, you remarked, when you were talking about the threat of a nuclear Iran to the Arab countries, you said that, in fact, Iran may be more of a threat to the Arab countries of the Gulf than to Israel. And so it raises the question in my mind as to how you evaluate the Israeli understanding of Iran's program as constituting an existential threat to Israel, or differently put, whether you feel that that an Iranian nuclear program that reached a weapon or a threshold stage is more a regional threat than a particular threat to one particular country.
Thank you. I think it's a good evidence that a diplomat should never make declaration to anybody. Actually, the question of deterrence. The first, you don't answer to the question if the military nuclearization of Iran, or even as I've said, the reality or the potential threat. As I've said, first, it will lead a lot of countries to follow the path. In any case, in the case of Israel, there is a question mark of, well, why not to have a deterrence, which means to go back that the NPT is dead, which is already a victim that deserves some consideration. After that, you have the case of Israel. You could consider that why not a deterrence, simply a balance of deterrence between a nuclear Israel. We can suppose that it's a nuclear power, and Iran, if Iran becomes a nuclear power. The problem of deterrence, again, and is based on the assumption by the leadership of the two sides that the other side is following the same logic, the same rationality. And again, here, of course, I'm not in the brain and of the Israeli leaders. Simply, I know Israel, and I know the history of the Jewish people. And when somebody says that he will believe that these countries should disappear from the map. He didn't say that he wants to destroy, but he said that he thinks that Israel should disappear from the map. I think it's feeding some gut feeling among the Israelis. So I simply said that the question is, on this basis, will the Israelis accept the logic of deterrence with this leadership? And I think it's a big, I guess it's a big question mark. I don't have the answer, but I think it's a big question mark. You know, really, it's because what you are referring to the public discourse. The problem is also the nuclear deterrence, and it's very difficult to understand, but it's really managed in a sense, by the leadership, and it's a sort of eye-to-eye, face-to-face reality between the Soviet and the Americans. It was the case, and in a sense, never the other side has believed that. A side has believed that the other side was going to risk the total destruction of its own country. So, will it be possible to have the same balance between Israel and Iran? I don't have the answer by definition. You know, really, simply, I've lived in Israel 6 years of my life. I've my doubt that the Israelis will take the risk, but that's an open question. That I think that's opinion, that everybody can have his own opinion. A country the second question, a country which has a nuclear deterrence, in a sense, nuclear deterrence being either you have the bomb or you are close to the threshold of the bomb or you are suspected to have the bomb, in a sense, feels protected, you know, really feels protected, and it leads to a real imbalance in the security in the part of the world. You know, really, you have a country suddenly in the Gulf countries where already you have a powerful country of 70 million of inhabitants in front of countries which are less populous. There is already a sort of strategic question which is there about the security. You know, and when introducing the nuclear deterrence factor, it increases this question mark, especially because you can nuclear deterrence is also active against conventional. It's a way of balancing the conventional superiority of your adversary. So it means that with nuclear deterrence, a country can deter, for instance, the U.S. You know, they can deter the U.S. from intervening in conventional terms, because the risk will be so big. We were discussing it in the stairs. I give the example of India, Pakistan. You know, really, Pakistan, in a sense, was already always deterred by the conventional superiority of India. You know, because India was obviously superior in conventional terms, while becoming a nuclear power. You know, it has a factor of reestablishing a military strategic balance between the two countries. So again, deterrence is a logic which is apparently logic. You can consider it's also a bit crazy. The problem is that it's something very fragile, which is based on assumptions on both sides. And the question is that these assumptions are the result of years and years of discussions, of face-to-face. And the question, and I don't have the answer again, is will it be possible to have this logic of deterrence in the Middle East, a region which is so unstable and so fragile? We don't want to run the risk. Simply, we don't want to run the risk. We don't want to have not only the NPT dead, but also this sort of bet on the stability of the Middle East. That's the reason why we want a diplomatic solution.
My second question starts from the observation that the nuclear issue with Iran is probably the most serious crisis that the United States has experienced with Iran since the hostage crisis, insofar as presidents have become personally involved and expectations have been raised, and so forth and so on. In the hostage crisis, there were severe sanctions. Iran was suffering eventually suffering from war. But before the war broke out, you had severe sanctions. And it was not clear why the hostages were not released, why there was no negotiation. Some people observed that during the period that the hostages were held, Iran had a referendum to approve a constitution. It elected a president, and it elected a parliament. And then about 1 week after the parliament was elected, it got in touch with the U.S. and said, now it's time to deal with the hostage crisis. In other words, the internal politics of the country seemed to take priority over the foreign policy, stalemate. The question is whether the nuclear issue in Iran is one that any Iranian can resolve, or whether there are internal issues in Iran that make it difficult, if not impossible, for a single Iranian figure to make the tough decision and go public with terminating the program. And if that is possibly the case, how does one appraise the internal situation in Iran with respect to the challenge that the Security Council is facing now?
Again, we don't want to terminate the Iranian nuclear program. We simply want to define measures for monitoring this program. We are not in the game of domestic politics in Iran. We are not in the game of domestic politics. We are, first, I think, because we are diplomats and we are in foreign relations. So we are coping, our relationship is with the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran. There is a political activities in Iran. We are following it, of course, but we are not playing on this game, playing these games. Our conviction is that this nuclear program has existed for 20 years. So, in a sense, it has been endorsed by a lot of different members of the Iranian leadership. So we could consider that it's not a question of one wing or another wing. Really, it has to be a decision of Iran. To consider that every policy is based on profit and cost. That's really the profit of a negotiation is more important than the cost of the confrontation with the international community.
Okay, thank you very much. My third and final question arises from the comments you made in your opening statement, where you said, and I think this is a correct quotation, that the goal of the Security Council or of the six is, quote, the restoration of international confidence in the civilian nature of the nuclear program. The word restoration prompts the question as to whether the origin of the Iranian nuclear program was civilian in nature, and it then either acquired a military aspect or it could acquire a military aspect. After all, the Shah of Iran himself had called for a civilian nuclear program of a very substantial scale before the revolution. So when you say restoring international confidence, how would that be done? What sort of thing could the Iranians publicly commit to that would, in your view, be convincing to the international community that the civilian nature of the program has been restored?
No, first, restoration, because Iran has had nuclear activities for a long time, and they are pretty legitimate. As I've said, beyond this program for medical reasons, for instance, or research, there was this discovery in 2002 of a clandestine program. And so that was sort of a shock for all the international community, especially because there is this question of enrichment. Iran is enriching uranium, and nobody knows what is the use of this enriched uranium, since Iran doesn't have nuclear power plant. It's like if you buy gas before buying a car. It doesn't make a lot of sense in financial and in technical terms. As for the measures which could be taken, again, that would be the result of a negotiation. Let's discuss with our Iranian counterparts, really, and let's open a negotiation. I can't say what will be the result of a negotiation. I guess that on one side, people will ask some very strong measures. On the other side, there will be reluctance, and at the end of the day, there will be a compromise. Really, again, as I've said, we want to discuss. We want to discuss what could be these measures. Of course, there are ideas floating around in terms, for instance, the additional protocol of because it's very technical. So there is the additional protocol of the International Agency of Atomic Energy, which has been suspended by the Iranian parliament. So we would want to have it not restored and implemented. You can also discuss specific measures of monitoring or of control. There is I think, there is room for a compromise. The fact that the Russians and the Chinese, I think, went to Tehran, as you can guess, they were ready to find a compromise. In the sense, as I've said, there are nuances among the six. It's not a mystery, and you can guess where more or less on the range of positions where are the six. And actually, the Russians and the Chinese, again, they didn't reach any result on this field. So that's, I guess, a good evidence that first there is a sense of compromise on our side. Secondly, simply the negotiation has not started.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to open the floor to questions. If you have a question, please go to the microphone in the center of the room and form a line. I'm going to take 3 questions and then allow the ambassador to respond, and then 3 more and give him a chance to respond, so that we don't, get constipated on this issue. And I urge you to make your questions clear and succinct, and refrain from making speeches. All right. Yes, sir, you're first.
Islamic Republic is not the same as was a year ago.
Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah. I say Islamic Republic is not the same as was.
She would like you to identify yourself.
Oh, I'm Anusha. I'm from Iran. I live in New York. Islamic Republic is not the same as was a year ago. It has lost its legitimacy. And so internal politics, you said you are a diplomat, you are not interested in internal politics of Iran, but why not? You are negotiating with whom you're going to negotiate. And if the government is not legitimate, so what it means for the negotiation? And secondly, the other question, my second question, this is true in relation to Pakistan. If the Pakistan deterrent was India, but if the government fails, aren't you worried about the Pakistan?
Thank you. By the way, when I said take 3 questions, what I meant was 1 question from 3 different speakers, not each person being invited to have multiple questions. But please, yes, go right ahead.
My name is Miriam. I just like to know, you said they don't want to start negotiation, neither your terms, nor their terms. I like to know more about these terms. What is their term that we said? We want to start negotiation, but they don't want whatever terms. You didn't explain those terms, neither yours nor theirs. Thank you.
Thank you. We actually have 3 questions at this point, so perhaps
No, what I was saying, of course, we are not that stupid, and which means that we are interested by analysis of the internal situation of Iran when you are negotiating. I'm sure that Iranians are interested by internal situation of the United States, for instance. Of course, you know, really. So we try to understand how it works and where it will go, and how the decision-making process works. You know, really, we have tried. What I've said is, in a sense, is here talking in official terms to send a very strong message that we are not here, as I've said already, for regime change. We are not. When I'm saying it's not, we are not interested by what is happening, but simply we are not going to play on that. You know, it's a different issue. The question of legitimacy, that's your opinion. We are facing a government which is a government of Islamic Republic of Iran, you know, and that's the only counterpart that we have, and I don't see to who else we could talk. Pakistan, it's not the topic of our discussion tonight. So the terms, when I've said on our terms, on their terms, I would say if there were terms on their terms, we were really at least discuss their terms. They have never offered terms of a negotiation. You know, really, it's never. You know, really, it's really repeating that Iran has inalienable rights to civilian nuclear energy, and nobody can deprive Iran from its inalienable rights, and so on. But basically nothing else. No answer to our proposal. Our terms, I think, as I've said, in 2006. And after that, we have refined and enlarged it in 2008. We have the 6 ministers and the 6 countries. And the second time, it was actually signed by the 6 ministers, including Secretary Rice, Condoleezza Rice. We said to the Iranians, if the nuclear issue is solved, we are offering you, full reintegration into the international community. And as you know, for the moment, beyond the sanctions linked to this issue, Iran is submitted to some sanctions, for instance, US sanctions. As you know, there are strong US sanctions against Iran. So there was an offer, for instance, the Iranians have problems to buy spare parts for their aircrafts because they are American and they are not allowed to do it. There are US sanctions. So what we were offering was to say to the Iranians, we are ready to cooperate with you on a lot of different issues. I said agriculture, civilian, finance, security. We are ready to take you as a legitimate, normal member of the international community. And there was in this framework, in this context, there was the nuclear issue. We were again provided that we could reach an agreement on the nuclear issue. That was our terms. And again, it was open terms, because when I have not answered to the question about what measures we could ask to the Iranians, it was not only a diplomatic way out, it was simply because it has to be the result of a negotiation. Really, that's the work of the diplomats, to reach a compromise. I can't forecast what will be the result of a negotiation. So there was, if we had reached a compromise with the Iranians, there was, beyond solving the problem, there was the prospect of the reintegration of Iran into the international community. It was our political terms. As for the detailed terms, as I've said, they have never asked us what were the detailed terms. So we couldn't even, as I've said, start a negotiation.
Hi, my name is Erica. I'm a PhD student in the political science department here. You've spoken a lot about how different states in the region might react to an open Iranian nuclear weapons program, specifically that we might expect to see proliferation. So I'm just curious what you think, if that does occur, what the international community could do about it practically, given that sanctions haven't really worked. So like what practical diplomatic moves are there if Iran does openly go nuclear?
Mr. Ambassador, could you speak about some of the politics surrounding oil and gas, especially with Russia, China, and Iran?
First, if again, the first question, as I've said, really, diplomacy is not, I think, a hard science, and it's not either reading in the crystal ball. And as I've said, there is the risk of a military confrontation. Really, we don't know whether countries will accept this prospect, really, and it's useless to say that it will be a major disaster in this part of the world, in any part of the world, but especially in this part of the world. Secondly, as I've said also, the risk is that simply the collapse of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And again, in the 70s, it was already a risk. Now it will be much, in a sense, it will be much more dangerous because, in a sense, it's much easier now to get the bomb. Getting the bomb is cheaper and easier than it was in the 70s. So I think it will really entail the end of the non-proliferation treaty. So what to do? I don't know. What will we do? I really don't know. I think very often the diplomats are described as cynical. A diplomat is in charge of the national interest of his country. And the national interest of a country, whatever is this country, are manifold. And some of them are economic, financial, and they are legitimate. Really the jobs of in our factories, they are a legitimate interest. So when you are facing such an issue, you have to take into account all the interests. And when we were negotiating, when I was negotiating the sanctions, the resolution of sanctions, first I had to negotiate with my treasury, because of course it has consequences on the French trade. The EU trade with Iran has decreased by 30% in 2008, I think, or 7. So it has consequences. Really, it's financial consequences. And the different countries are exposed to this risk in different manners. Because first their trade has different form. For instance, one of the European countries has more medium and short size corporations. So it means that if these corporations are losing a deal, it's much more painful than if it is a large corporation. So it's obvious that the first country will be maybe more sensitive, more hesitant. It doesn't mean that he's cynical or interested, but it's really it's different. It depends also on your energy dependence. Some countries simply for historical reasons or some reasons don't import oil from Iran. The U.S. Really, while other countries are importing oil from Iran. So of course, some countries are again more or less sensitive. So it's obvious that as I've said, between the 6 countries, you have different interests, which means that you have also nuanced approach to sanctions. Some countries, for instance, the sanctions are more and more actually targeting the trade, but it means targeting the trade means the state sponsorship of the trade. We give, we don't prevent trade, but simply we say that what is prevented is, for instance, state assurance for release. And among the countries, some of them are more, the state has more importance than other countries, which means that when you prevent, for instance, assurance or reassurance of trade by a state, in some countries, the state is very active, other countries, the state is not active, so it has different consequences. So, so it's very complicated. And again, I want to go beyond the Iranian example. You have always, in my job, you have always to face, and part of my job is to understand the other side. to say if such or such doesn't agree with me, it's not because he's bad and I'm good, certainly, but also maybe because his interests are different. So that's the case. Obviously, that's the case. Some countries are more dependent on Iranian oil than other countries, which is not the case of Russia, which is not dependent at all on Iranian oil. But with Russia, there is also the problem of the geographic proximity. So, again, there is another element which means which can lead to some difference of approach. The United States, they are very far. They have no financial, economic relationship whatsoever with Iran, or limited to really very small interest. So the Americans, in a sense, are much more prone to strong sanctions, because in a sense, strong sanctions actually cost nothing to the US. And as a French moralist was saying in the 17th century, you are always ready to accept the sacrifice of your neighbor. That's also a reality. Really, that's a reality. And considering also the economic situation, jobs have some interest, are important. Having said that, as the President of the French Republic has repeatedly said, my country is in favor of strong sanctions.
Mr. Ambassador, I'm Jose Vericat. I'm a student here at SIPA doing a Master's in International Affairs. I'd like to ask you a very simple question, very, very naive perhaps, but certainly the question that the majority of citizens of the Middle East would ask if when confronting this issue concerning the Iranian nuclear question, and that is they would immediately think of the Western double standards relating to Israel possessing the bomb, the nuclear capacity. Do you not think that the moral superiority of the powers that are trying to negotiate with Iran is lost because of the fact of not addressing that issue first? Certainly, that's the position of your average Middle Eastern citizen, including many of the Iranians themselves, I presume. Thank you.
I'm surprised by this question.
Thank you, Ambassador. You were alluding to China earlier, and I was just wondering, are there any thoughts being developed about a plan B in the event that China is not able to be on board for this new round of sanctions? Are there other ideas being developed or thought about? Thank you.
First, on Israel, really, I had prepared the answer to the question because I knew that sooner or later it will come. First, I think if Iran has nuclear ambitions, and we want to be reassured about it, I insist on this point, these ambitions have nothing to do with Israel. Really, raising Israel in this factor, in this crisis, is a polemical argument, frankly, which is used like in other issues in this region to hide the real issue. First, the Iranian nuclear program, I started with the Shah. At the time of the Shah, Iran was a close ally and a close friend of Israel. After that, it has been relaunched after the war with Iraq in 1988, because Iran has been targeted by chemical weapons which were sent by Iraq. So again, Israel had nothing to do, nothing you can identify as the source of the Iranian nuclear program. After that, it's very useful because it has always a big effect in the public opinion to raise, but frankly, it's more it's a smoke screen, really, for the Iranian program. Iran is not engaged into a nuclear program because of Israel. It has nothing to do. It's good, as we say in French, it's a bonne guerre to use it, but it's a polemical argument. But to go further, first, again, as I've said, I'm defending the interest of my country. As I've said, one of the first interests I identify is the maintenance of the NPT and of the non-proliferation regime. And so far, again, I'm not aware that Israel, which has not signed the NPT, has violated its obligation or in any way contributed to proliferation. You know, really, I don't see, but maybe I'm wrong, but I have not seen. And the fact that Israel is maybe a nuclear power so far has not led to undermining the NPT. While I do think that if Iran, which had signed the NPT, if Iran was violating the NPT, it would be an important and negative element. Having said that, I don't want to dismiss your question or the concern, which I think you're perfectly right to say that it's a common concern among in the main industry in the Middle East. And again, I think it goes beyond the nuclear issue, Iranian nuclear issue. It's going also on other issues, and especially the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But having said that, we do support, the French, we do support a WMD-free zone in the Middle East, a WMD-free zone in the Middle East. And I think it has been accepted by most of the countries, or all the countries of the region, and we should work on it. And maybe the NPT review conference could be a step into this direction. But WMD, it's not only nuclear, it's WMD, which means also chemical weapons and biological weapons. And a lot of countries, and not only Israel actually, a lot of countries in the region have not signed the Convention on Chemical Weapons, and also the Convention on Biological Weapons. And as you know, deterrence is nuclear, but for some countries, it's also nuclear versus chemical or nuclear versus biological. So I think, in a sense, in the first, as a good balanced, in the first part, I dismissed your question. In the second part, I accepted. I rejoined you by saying that I think that after we have solved this question, I think we should move forward to work on a WMD-free zone.
Yes.
Hello, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Andreina Flores from Radio France International. And you said in your opening statement that the Security Council had decided in the past to apply sanctions to Iran. But you said as well that if discussion is not working, then you have to make more pressure. So my question is, what have been exactly the sanctions to Iran, the previous sanction to Iran, and what would be the sanctions this year? I mean, how are you planning to increase the pressure if that's the case? And secondly, if you allow me, the First Minister of France, François Fillon, has declared that your country would ask firmly to apply sanctions to Iran. And my question is, are you presenting this proposal to the Security Council these days? Thank you.
First, I think there was a question on China, really, and we are not yet, or we are not actually in thinking of a plan B. I think it's crucial, it's essential for the legitimacy of what we are doing. It's totally essential to work with the Chinese, even if it means waiting a bit, even if it means really we really need China. I think I insist. The legitimacy of what we are trying, I think, is really largely based on the fact that the P5 we are united, that China, Russia, and we are and the three Western powers of the Security Council, we are united. So it's not only for the moment, but I think it's I wouldn't consider really in a sense dumping or China. No, really I wouldn't consider as a viable solution. On the sanctions, they are public. I'm not going to make the list. There are resolution 1737, 1747, 1803, reaffirmed by resolution 1835. So you look at the UN site, and you have the resolutions about sanctions. As I've said, I'm not going to discuss the news. So it means that my authorities have said publicly that we want to have sanctions, significant sanctions, but I'm not going to discuss what sort of sanctions we are indeed proposing.
Thank you very much. My name is Ali from Mission of Iran. The nature of my intervention, rather than raising question, is commenting on some of the points that Ambassador raised during his introductory remarks and in Q&A answer session. In fact, lots of points raised by Ambassador are subject to denial, discussion, and controversy. But I don't want to get into details. I just want to answer to some of the points that Ambassador raised. In fact, Ambassador, you mischaracterized and misrepresented some of the realities on the grounds and what happened, what has happened since 2003. For example, you stated that negotiation did not start really, and that is not the case. I think we and the 3 European countries, Iran and 3 European countries, negotiated for 2.5 years, while Iran suspended its enrichment activity, which is its right under the NPT. But at the end, because of the insistence of the European part, and that was originated by the objection of the United States, you came up with a proposal that denied Iran's right to enrichment. So we had negotiations. We were prepared to have limited enrichment at that time, but you denied the right to enrichment. And you said that's a concrete objective to non-diversion. And the second point that you missed in presentation, I think, is to refer to the reports of the IAEA. The reports of the IAEA are very clear that in stating that Iran has no diversion to prohibited activities, and we are in full compliance with the NPT. So the concern is not the concern of international community. The concern is the concern of some Western countries which have the veto power in the Security Council. And the Security Council is not representing the international community. That's why international community is insisting on reforming the Security Council. And the last point, I don't want to dispute all of the points that you raised. I think we should keep in mind that Iran is not seeking nuclear weapons, but Iran insists on its right to nuclear technology. And if we start with 2 principles, if we accept 2 principles, we can reach a final solution. The first principle is that Iran has the right to nuclear technology. And the second is that Iran should not have nuclear weapons. I think our negotiating counterparts in the 5+1 group should show seriousness about addressing, rather than dismissing enrichment rights that Iran is entitled under the NPT. With that principles, I think we can find an exit to this issue, which we believe is solvable, and due to dogmatic insistence by Western countries, we have not been able to resolve. Thank you very much.
Thank you. First, I think, I'm not going to enter in polemics, it's not Western, again, since, as you know, among the 6, there is Russia and China, and that Russia and China have tried to reach a compromise with Iran and didn't succeed. It's not Western. That's a very point. As for the reports of the International Agency for Atomic Energy, here we disagree. The International Agency has repeatedly said that Iran is not answering to questions about alleged studies on military topics, and the Board of Governors of the International Agency has voted 2 resolutions on this issue, expressing its concerns. I think that the reports of the agency are certainly online, and you can look at it. You can look at it, and you can look at the last part. I can even advise you to go to the last paragraphs of the resolutions of the agency. And as for the two principles, we do agree with these two principles. But these two principles were in the letter of the three European ministers in 2003. And since then, for 6 years, we have not succeeded to open a negotiation. So I guess maybe it's more complicated. But I think there is a will of finding, God forbid, of finding a diplomatic solution.
Mr. Ambassador, this week there was an article published in the National Interest by an American political scientist who asserted that we would not see a new round of sanctions against Iran because certain members of the Security Council, namely Russia and China, had strategic interests in seeing a nuclear Iran come to bear, a nuclear weapons holding Iran. And those strategic interests are allegedly the fact that a nuclear Iran would constrain U.S. military action in the Middle East. Can you comment on this suggestion?
You know, it's not a French diplomat who can discuss intellectuals. You know, really, it's, we accept their imagination. No, the fact is, Russia and China, as I've said, are active part of our groups. They have voted 5 resolutions or 6. I'm always lost. But now it's 5 resolutions against Iran, 3 of them with sanctions. So I guess there is no reason to doubt that they don't want to have a nuclear. It would be too destabilizing. You know, really, it would be much too destabilizing in the region and in the world. The end of the non-proliferation. You know, as for the military nuclear energy, you can also argue that you know, the don't want to remain a closed club. So there are 5 countries, official nuclear powers, plus 2 out of the club and 1 unofficial. So they don't want to add 1 country more because it adds a lot of uncertainties to the strategic balance. In a sense, you know, Iran is closer to Russia than it is to the U.S. So I really think it's a bit far-fetched. And it doesn't fit the reality of the Chinese and the Russian diplomatic activities. There is a point that I want to join our Iranian friend, is we do want the reform of the Security Council. I think President Sarkozy has repeatedly said that we need to have a Security Council which is representative of the new reality. The Security Council is the reflection of 1945. If we want to keep the effectiveness of the Council, we have to enlarge it to the emerging powers. So with UK, we have made several proposals to try to move forward the process, which is a ruling process, because in the UN, I think everybody tries to prevent its neighbor to join the Security Council, which makes a lot of squabbles, but we do want to reform.
If you'll permit me a second question on the issue of reform at the UN, what positive lessons do you think we can draw from the Iranian example that we can possibly bring to bear this spring at the NPT review or in reforming the IAEA in the future to help prevent cases like this?
No, I do think first the fact of having worked with you know, the US, Russia, and China, in a sense, is a positive element, and it's showing that we are going again with all the nuances, the different interests, and also some mistrust. You know, we are under the shadow of the Iraqi crisis. You know, really. So there was especially last year, or you know, in some circles. Especially in Moscow, the idea of saying, well, the Americans are asking for sanctions, but actually they want to use it to bomb, to go to war. You know, so there was a sort of lack of trust, a mistrust. So it was not easy to overcome this mistrust and to arrive to a common attitude of the 5. And I think that's an important element. The world has changed. And that's the reason why I'm not sure that for Russia and China, their priority is to undermine the strategic balance at the expense of the US. So that's the really certainly. On the non-proliferation regime, we are first, it has not started with Iran. It has started, with all the activities of North Korea. North Korea is the IKEA of proliferation. Really, you go there and you can buy whatever you want. Really, you can find Koreans everywhere. Really, I'm not going to give names of countries, but that's the case. So that's the reason why, and it was a US initiative that we have supported actively. We have had a resolution at the Security Council with, under the presidency of President Obama himself in September, Resolution 1887, to combat proliferation. As I've said, it's much easier. You can, in a sense, you can buy elements of a bomb and have it in kit. Really, we discovered it in 2003 when Libya suddenly decided to become nice and revealed the extension of its program, and we were all amazed. Actually, Libya had nearly about, all the elements of a nuclear military program. Libya has given up this program, but for us it has been also a waking up call. We have had, so proliferation has become, certainly, and again, I go well beyond the Iranian crisis, even if it's linked, because there are some sources of technology which are coming. You have had the AU-CAN, Pakistan, network of proliferation. You have the activities of North Korea, which is exporting technologies, but also missiles everywhere, basically to everybody who can pay. So it has led to a lot of insistence on this issue of proliferation. All the regime of control of exports have been tightened, are much more effective. But it has, of course, it's also leading to other questions for the future. And one of the big questions is enrichment, enrichment of uranium, because enrichment is really a proliferating activity. So there are a lot of different proposals, one of them Russian, in the sense of giving countries, because you don't, enrichment, for instance, South Korea has 18 power plants. South Korea doesn't enrich uranium because you can buy uranium on the market, enrich uranium on the market. It's cheap. And actually, really, so there is no need in financial economic terms, it doesn't make sense to enrich uranium before you have between 10 and 12 nuclear power plants. So there is the question of enrichment, which is proliferating. So how can we control this activity, which is not easy because some countries are seeing that as a way of restricting the access, legitimate access to some technology. But there are Russian proposals and other proposals to offer enriched uranium facilities under international control, to have a sort of, the International Agency for Atomic Energy monitoring a sort of international facility for enrichment, so which could give guarantee to countries which want to have nuclear energy that they have access to fuel, enriched fuel. There is also a new insistence on nuclear disarmament, and especially after the speech of President Obama on the world without nuclear weapons. So again, there are a lot of questions, especially because in the globalized world, everything, technologies, people, and also materials circulate, of course, much more easily. And again, the technology of the nuclear weapons, which was maybe very difficult in the 40s or 50s for most of the countries, now is within reach of most of the countries. So that's the I guess the concerns we have, and a lot of things are done, and are done by I think by a sort of consensus among the international community, with the exception that countries are really attached to the idea that they have rights and we shouldn't deny them their rights.
to fit the ambassador's schedule, we're going to have to make the next question the final question.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I'm Dennis. I'm a grad student here at Columbia. And, well, I guess one of the central arguments made by the Iranians and North Koreans is that if India can detonate and test a nuclear weapon and then after many years be declared an official nuclear state, as well as Pakistan afterwards, and then if Britain, France, the United States, they can all test nuclear weapons before, and they're now all officially recognized as nuclear states within the international community. So why can't the Iranians and the North Koreans as well?
Because they have signed the NPT. The Non-Proliferation Treaty is based on a deal. The deal was, in a sense, to close the club. You know, you have 5 nuclear powers, but in exchange, the nuclear powers were providing nuclear technology, free and access to nuclear technology for civilian use of nuclear energy. So that's the deal of the NPT. Again, you can consider that this deal is not balanced. Nobody has ever said that life is a fair place. But that's the deal of the NPT, and India has not signed the NPT, so India has not violated its obligations, while North Korea and Iran have signed the NPT. I know that at your age you can consider that signing or not signing, you know, it's a detail, you know, really. But again, that's really a sort of legalistic nicety of a diplomat, you know, really, which is, as you know, basically relevant to the real life, the diplomat. Actually, the international community, the international life is based on this sort of agreements, treaties, which try to organize the international life. If you go out of the system, if you break your commitment, that's a crisis. You enter into a crisis because you, as I've said, you undermine all the system. In a sense, this NPT system, as you can emphasize, is not balanced. It's a bit weird. It's a bit strange, and which means that it's very fragile. And if somebody starts by saying that the emperor has no clothes, it means that suddenly saying, well, why we should accept. It means that the system is collapsed. The system is threatened of collapsing. The question is, if Iran violates its obligation, I'm not saying that it does, but if it violates its obligation, there will be no reason for other countries not to do it. So it's the end of the NPT. And again, we are not rejoicing that India and Pakistan have tested a nuclear weapon. But the fact is they have not signed the NPT. And secondly, which is very important and which is not the case of North Korea, especially for India. India has never been associated with any proliferating activities, because it's a fact to have the nuclear technology. It's another fact to sell it. And India has not had any proliferating activity. Israel has not had any proliferating activity. With Pakistan, you have the problem of the AQ-CAN network. So now, apparently, it is under control. So thank you very much to have been patient to listen to me.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Araud.
Thank you again, Ambassador Araud, on behalf of the School of International and Public Affairs. Thank you as well to Professor Bulliet, and thank you all for coming tonight.